Well, welcome back, folks, to another episode of Coffee Table Theology. A real pleasure to be joined today by a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Richard Saunders Hindley. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hi, Gareth. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little about yourself, sort of personally and professionally.
Yeah, sure. I'm Richard Saunders Hindley, as you said. I live in Barnsley in South Yorkshire, originally from the Wirral. So that's my biography, probably as much as you need to know. I am a preacher here in Barnsley with the Wesleyan Reform Union of Churches. You can ask me about the Wesleyan Reform Union of Churches if you like to, but people can always Google it if they want to find out more. We're a small denomination, and so I'm with them. I have been a member of faculty at Cliff College in the past, where I was academic director for a time during COVID, just before and just after. I now am working with others to establish a small theological education enterprise called the OAR Academy, and OAR stands for Association of Wesleyan Evangelicals. So perhaps that gives you a clue as to the to where people are coming from, both theologically and in terms of church. But we want to make good theological education accessible to people in local churches.
Oh, fantastic. That is great to hear. And this, of course, is, chimes with a little bit of what we're trying to do through this podcast. It's less formal than the wonderful work that you are delivering through the OAR Academy. But essentially, we're trying to have a theological conversation that people can listen into and hopefully find accessible. So it's great to have you on the show, Richard. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. We'll let people look up at their leisure the Wesleyan Reform Union, which I'm sure they'll enjoy doing. But one thing you didn't mention in your biography was that you're an Everton fan, and you live in Barnsley. So there's two elements which you need intercessory prayer for there, I think.
Well, I mean, of course, Barnsley is the hometown of Hudson Taylor, as you know. I'm sure I've mentioned that to you before,
You have, yeah.
Gareth. And so people can always come and do the Hudson Taylor Trail around Barnsley Town Centre. And while they're doing that, they can pay homage at the statue of Dickie Bird as well. So, it's all here. It's all here.
There we are.
Yeah.
It's a bit like Nathaniel, isn't it, in John's Gospel, saying what good can come out of Nazareth. It's a bit like what good could possibly come out of Barnsley. But there we are.
Yeah.
And you've dissuaded me of that and persuaded me otherwise. So that's good. So let's just talk about what we're meant to be talking about, which is Jesus. And he is a good person to be discussing. And we're thinking in this series of episodes of what it means for Jesus to be kind of divine and his kind of identity and character. So today we're thinking specifically about the kind of statement in the Nicene Creed that Jesus is the only Son of God. Mm-hmm. I think when you hear that, Richard, what sort of first comes to mind, or what sort of concepts come into your head?
I think for me, the thing that really immediately comes to mind is the thing that's always kind of come to my mind. I grew up in the church, which is another little bit of biography there. So my dad was ordained in the Church of England, so that's where I grew up. I grew up saying the creeds, and what always came to my mind with the expression "Son of God" is really the Gospels and where Jesus is called Son of God in the Gospels. And those, they're always really vivid scenes, or often very vivid scenes where that happens. So, blind Bartimaeus, calls out Son of David, actually, but, that son of. And then when Jesus is on the cross, if you really are the Son of God, and all of that. So, it's that claim that the Gospels make, but for me was really kind of encapsulated in those kind of vivid images of Jesus in his ministry and in his life and work. And so that's what always has kind of come to my mind, Jesus as that person, as that character that I always really kind of wanted to know more about.
Okay. No, fantastic. And I mean, um, and I mean, how would you describe then to somebody who doesn't have any faith background at all, the concept of God having a son? I mean, how,
Mm,
we talk about Jesus as God's son within the church quite
mm,
freely, and I don't really think about it, if I'm honest. But actually, to kind of come along that concept, or come to that concept, for some could be quite, fascinating or mysterious. Others even, I'm thinking perhaps of Muslims, perhaps would find that a blasphemous statement. How could
mm.
God possibly have a son? I mean, how do you think we might explain that simply but well to people who perhaps are not yet Christians?
Um, yeah, I mean that's a great question, and I think in some ways is if we can do that, then I think we're well on the way to helping people really discover who Jesus is for themselves. I mean, I think um, again, I kind of would go back to the Gospels really, and probably to the beginning of John's Gospel.
Mm,
The great prologue in
mm,
John's Gospel, and where John sets out, who Jesus is. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And I would just want to convey to somebody, I think, that to talk of Jesus as the Son of God is to talk of a real person, but a real person who embodies the Creator God, the
mm,
God that made everything that we see around us, the God who sustains us, the God who watches over us, and so on, and that this is all embodied in this real person
mm,
called Jesus, and that this person called Jesus is a really compelling figure,
mm,
much more than any fictional character or any sort of historical figure, any other historical figure. Someone who stands apart and is really worth getting to learn about and know about, and to see at work in the lives of people today. So I would probably go at it that way,
mm,
and I would want to really to kind of emphasize Jesus as a real person,
mm,
um, and then kind of connect that to well, actually, he is a real person. He really was there in history,
mm,
um, but he was really special,
mm.
and you can know him for yourself.
No, great, thank you. And that's a really helpful kind of encapsulation that, Jesus makes God present, makes God real in a way that we can fully identify with. And I guess that's the mystery and wonder of the incarnation. So
Mm,
thank you for that. I want to just wonder, sort of, diverting from our pre-planned questions, you talked, beautifully there about Jesus being an amazing and special I wonder how has that journey evolved for you? I mean, you mentioned that you're a child of the church and
mm,
a father who's was ordained, and so I imagine I could be wrong that there's a fair bit of assumed knowledge, that comes by osmosis in that context. But what was the journey like for you in coming from knowing about who
mm.
Jesus was to knowing Jesus for yourself?
Um, yeah, I mean, you're right. I certainly grew up just kind of absorbing, the stories of Jesus and the Bible generally, and the life of worship and church and so on. So for me, there wasn't a kind of a great conversion moment. It was more, as people say, that kind of journey really, where I always understood that from an early age, who Jesus was. And I knew as well, because it was taught to me, that it was important that I knew Jesus for myself. And so I count myself very fortunate that I was, taught to pray
Mm,
and taught to have confidence about praying, and to know, to be able to speak to Jesus as we were told as kids. So I guess that I've always had that sense of personal connection with Jesus. And I think for me, actually, one of the things that really if you like, took it to another level, or kind of was a real kind of moment for me in my Christian life, was a little bit later on when I was at one time a member of the Methodist Church, and I was exploring the call to become a local preacher in the Methodist Church, and uh, it was in response to that call, I think, and talking to people and praying with people and praying myself about that I really kind of perhaps took a step ultimately to what into the world of theological education. But in that very early time, I was kind of taking a step towards really being dependent on Jesus in a way that perhaps I hadn't been before in terms of Christian vocation. So that really for me kind of brought an extra dimension to my understanding of my relationship with Jesus. And but I mean that was kind of building on that lifelong knowledge and intimacy with Jesus that my parents had given me.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's true, often, isn't it, within the field of education, whether that is academic education or practical education, that sort of vocational education, that when we actually start stepping into doing something, the theory often becomes very real, doesn't it? I mean, it's one thing learning something from a book or a lecturer, but when they say, right, go and try it, you then think, oh, this is how it works. So, I was just sort of thinking about that. Not saying that it wasn't in place beforehand, but just that trying it out in a new way means that new things fit into place with a different perspective, or a renewed figure. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we're talking, about how we kind of relate to Jesus, and we talked about Jesus being God's son, and Jesus giving God a face, as you like, making God real. But I mean, I guess that why, why is it important that there's only one Jesus? Why couldn't God have lots of different children? And who ultimately do the same thing in different eras? Why is Jesus, special himself only? Any ideas?
Well, I mean, when we're kind of thinking of the creed, and particularly the Nicene Creed, we're kind of thinking of that part of the creed where it says, he is of one substance with the Father. So actually, we can get into some of the kind of theological jargon, maybe, but
Feel free.
well, we could the Jesus is the embodiment, the incarnation, the embodiment of the one God. There is one God, and Jesus is the one expression of that one God in terms of incarnation. I think, I mean, in the ancient world, it was part of the expression of the divine, that the gods, could have lots of children, and they did. Zeus had children coming out of his head and other places.
Literally,
So I mean, the idea of a god spawning children was not at all unusual. But in the case of Israel's God, in the case of the God of the Bible, it's different. He is the only God, and he is the one who says, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods. So it makes perfect sense for that one God to be present in the one Son. So I think that it's all a part of that expression of God's oneness, that I think is really important, and that's why we have one Son. Otherwise, like you say, we could have had multiple sons, just like there are kind of like multiple angels. There are, and indeed, as we know, multiple people. There are all kinds of multiples, but only one God and only one Son.
Mm.
of the God. And I think that oneness is really at the heart of who God is.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. Well, we're going to take a little break now and listen to some tunes carefully selected by my masters here at Pure 24/7 Radio. And then we'll be back in a couple of moments' time for some more conversation. Well, welcome back, folks, to today's Coffee Table Theology with me, the Reverend Dr. Gareth Higgs. I'm based at Moorlands College down in sunny Dorset in the bottom of the United Kingdom. And I'm joined today by a friend and colleague, Dr. Richard Saunders Hindley. And Richard's a theologian and a practitioner in higher and further education, and working at the minute as the director of the Orr Academy, which we described earlier on. That's a place trying to deliver accessible theological education for people within the evangelical Wesleyan family, should we put it that way. So we're talking about Jesus, and it's been great to hear of some of Richard's experiences and thinking so far. And we're just going to continue that kind of conversation now in this second section. So we were getting to talk about Jesus being the only Son of God because there's only one God, and that those things being linked together. So what is it then if we kind of just come at that from a different angle? It's the same question but a different angle. What makes Jesus unique amongst other religious teachers? So there have been other people, even in Jesus' own era, peddling their wares, telling stories, even claiming to work miracles, and setting out moral frameworks. What makes Jesus unique amongst those, or of other subsequent teachers?
Well, like you say, it's a kind of a different way of coming at the same question that we were thinking of just before. So I think there's the oneness of the God of the Bible is at the heart of it. But again, going back to the Gospels, when we kind of think of Jesus and what Jesus was doing in his life and ministry, he was proclaiming good news. And I like what Tom Wright says about this, N.T. Wright says about this. He says there's a difference between good news and good advice. And I think, we can find a lot of teachers who perhaps give good advice about, how you can order your life a particular way, or particular things you can do to make yourself happier, or whatever it might be. Jesus announces good news, and the good news he announces is that the kingdom of God has come near. It's nearly here. It's kind of in touching distance, and then his own life and ministry plays that out, so that when his followers then go on to proclaim the good news, they're proclaiming the good news that Jesus is Lord. And so Jesus is he is an amazing teacher. I mean, in the Gospels, it's just so compelling, isn't it? When we read the parables, or we read the Sermon on the Mount, or any other parts of Jesus' teaching and what he was doing, it's fantastic. But there's something more than that. It's not just a teacher. He is Lord. He is the one who has rescued the human race from where it was going, which was down the tubes, and he's rescued us from that scenario, and taken us, and given us life. So he's a teacher, and he's not less than a teacher, but he's so much more than a teacher. Just as he is a prophet. He's somebody who speaks God's words, but he's not only a prophet, he's more than that. So, I think at every step, Jesus is just so much more than other, teachers that he might be compared with.
Yeah, sure. And it's that, isn't it? That I mean, that's certainly part of it, a big part of it, as to why we give and attribute Jesus more authority than a first century philosopher, or a Jewish sage, or or even a kind of medieval philosopher that comes up with a framework for thinking and living, whatever it might might be. And I'm not wanting to be, rude or dismissive of other frameworks in a irreverent way. But Jesus, it's because Jesus is God's son that we take his teaching seriously, and it's because his teaching is so remarkable, captivating, captivating, full of wisdom. It stood the test of time. That also then begins to be evidence for why we think he's God's son, and
Mm.
he's so much more. So, I mean, I don't know whether there's anything more to say around, or anything more to add around the idea that the kind of authority that Jesus acts with, as well as how he speaks,
Mm.
conveys the idea of his divine authority. I don't know.
Yeah, well, people have spent entire careers on this, Gareth. So I mean,
So I'm expecting
I
you
mean,
to
I'm
finish it
sure,
in
yeah,
3 minutes. Yeah,
yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah. This will be a big editing job for somebody.
yeah.
Um, but actually, one of the things that I've come to learn about over the last few years that I didn't know much about before is the whole thing of temple theology
Mm,
in the Bible and in particularly the Gospels and the New Testament.
mm,
And so, I mean, basically, for people that don't know much about that, an ancient temple, including the temple in Jerusalem, was a place where the divine and the earthly meet. So the sort of two dimensions of existence kind of meet and overlap.
mm,
And Jesus, or the Gospels claim for Jesus that he is a living temple. He is the living person in whom the divine and the human dimensions, overlap and come
mm,
together. And so he has authority. In so when the man he comes through the roof,
yeah.
the paralytic man is kind of his friends kind of smash up the roof and lower him down, and Jesus forgives him. He says that first of all he forgives him his sins, and that causes a bit of outrage amongst some people because there's not only can God is the only one who can forgive sins. Actually, there's a particular kind of procedure that you need to go through for
Mm,
that, which involves, at least in its kind of fullest sense, being at the temple. But Jesus is
mm,
saying in the way that he does it that
mm,
he has that authority. So that coming together of the divine and of the human dimensions of existence in the person of Jesus
yeah.
is a unique way of bringing that authority that previously you would go to a particular location for.
Mm,
Um, I found that really helpful and really enlightening
yeah.
in lots of ways in understanding some of the things that Jesus was doing and saying and why people reacted to him in particular ways, either positively or negatively.
Mm. I think that's absolutely right. You referenced earlier on John 1, where in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was
Mm,
with God. Coming up to that time of year where we're going to hear this passage read lots
yeah,
of times if we go to a church carol service. But of course, the climax of that verse is, and the Word became the Word. That is the ever existing Jesus became
yes,
flesh and dwelt among us.
yes,
So
yes, yeah,
lives. He templed among us. I think Tom
yeah,
writes as a
yeah,
tabernacle.
yeah. Tabernacle, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. He pitched his tent. Yes,
Yes, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
and
it's
I think
it's a tabernacle word. Yeah,
yeah. So that's all just wonderful kind of image, really.
yeah,
That Jesus is the complete embodiment of God's dwelling
yeah,
among
yeah,
humankind.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
indeed.
and just to add to that, I mean, John is an amazing, a spectacular
Mm,
gift to us.
mm,
But actually, so are all the Gospels, and I, and I love Matthew
mm.
for the same thing comes out in a different way in Matthew. He
It
is
does. Yep.
Emmanuel,
Yep.
God with us, and then at the end, I
Yes.
am with you always. So
Indeed.
it's all good stuff.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Matthew's Gospel, I have to say.
Mm.
If I ever get the luxury of getting to teach a whole unit through a whole book of the Bible, that's my kind of aim, really. But alas, I'm yet to be trusted with such responsibility. But there we are. There's a project for the Awe Academy, Richard. Let's write a Matthew module, a handbook for
Okay.
discipline. Anyway, both you and I, less so now, but as you know, I used to live in the north of England in a post-industrial context as well, in East Lancashire. You're based in Barnsley, again,
Mm,
post-industrial landscape, just outside Sheffield.
mm,
And what those two places, well, a lot of those things have in common, they both begin with B, is actually they're increasingly multicultural places, or at least, at very least, bicultural places where there are
mm,
distinctive cultures and distinctive faith-based worldviews.
mm.
So, we're both familiar with that. I wonder what it means then, for us to call Jesus the only Son of God, and to do that with clarity and firmness
Yeah.
and authority, but to do that also with humility and care. I don't know whether
Mm.
that's anything you've ever kind of thought through or rubbed up against, in day-to-day life. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I should probably just clarify, particularly for any listeners that there may be in Barnsley, that when you said just outside Sheffield, you meant, of course, completely separate from Sheffield and having absolutely nothing to do with it. But um,
Of course. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's true because I mean, Barnsley. So just in terms of Barnsley, the context here in Barnsley. Which I'm sure many people recognize, in their own context in the UK, certainly, is that, we have a very kind of small church-going population. The vast majority of people, don't go to church or indeed have a lot of Christian knowledge at all. So, there is, kind of a whole, if you like, a whole kind of void there in terms of people's knowledge and understanding and so on. That said, I think that there is openness among people to hear more. So when we're kind of encountering that, and one of the other things, perhaps just to say as well, is that sort of politically, I think that many of the kind of traditional demographic here in Barnsley are the kind of former white working class, population, perhaps feel a little bit kind of pushed out
Yeah.
in some ways. Some of that might just be perception, or it might be real. So when we're kind of wanting to tell them about who Jesus is and really invite them, to know him more and to know him for themselves. I think where we need to do what Jesus did, and that is kind of meet them where they are. And I
Mm.
think that often where people are here in Barnsley is in need of some and this sounds a little bit dramatic, but some sort of, healing, some sort of, whether that's in terms of, physical healing or, other health issues that they might have, or relationships, or, all those kinds of things that are really stressing people, and, seem to be stressing people more and more. Actually, I think just bringing them to a place where, again, going to John's gospel, where we're inviting them to sort of to meet Jesus, who will, through whom they can have life and have it in abundance,
Mm.
is often where I think we want to kind of go with people. And so, we've done things here like healing on the streets. I don't know
Yeah.
whether you've come across that
Yeah. Yeah.
before. And people may know about that, and it kind of does what it says on the tin, really. We've been on the street and we prayed with people, and we prayed, for that healing of whatever kind that they might need. And actually, as much as in the explanations, if you like, of who Jesus is and what that means, it is in the actual encounter that, people find for themselves, Jesus, the only Son of God,
Mm,
and what that
mm.
means, and that they actually encounter Him. So I don't know if that's really kind of getting at what you were asking, Gareth, but I mean, I just think in a kind of real life setting, here is often not the starting point is often not kind of explanation or unpacking of the concept. It's much more the actual encounter with Jesus.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand that completely, and I appreciate that
Mm,
fully, and yeah, I entirely agree. I mean, I was just doing some work with some students of mine this morning, actually, or the day that we're recording this, and we were talking about the report,
mm.
two reports, recent reports, the Quiet Revival from the Bible Society
Yeah,
and Finding Jesus from the Evangelical Alliance, who are tracking
yeah,
the experience of new Christians relating
yeah,
to the church in the UK, and the amount of time that people, the welcome and inclusion of Christians, getting alongside, meeting them where they're at, serving their needs,
mm,
contributed to people eventually ending
yeah,
up as faithful, worshipping
yeah,
followers of Jesus,
yeah,
was remarkable, and that was a
yeah,
point that was made by some of the students this morning.
yeah,
So I fully get it that we're often starting from a different place. I think that the when it comes to um, um, the kind of the gospel, the good news, I am just keen, and nothing you were saying was denying this, just to be
mm,
absolutely clear. But I'm just keen that we remember that Jesus isn't just one of many options. He's not
mm,
just a route to
yeah,
God. He himself said, "I am the way,
yes,
the truth, the
yeah,
life."
and the life, yeah,
Yeah, so the fact
yeah,
that he's the only Son of God
yes,
and he is the
yes,
unique Son of God
yeah,
is of high importance. And I realise that that may be jarring, particularly to Muslims who perhaps would find the fact that God had a son difficult. It might be jarring to Hindus or people who have a concept of many different gods, and therefore Jesus is kind of one of those many options. And I realise that's difficult and challenging, but it is
mm,
the claim that Jesus made of himself, I think.
mm.
And I don't think we should be afraid to assert that, is kind of what I was
No,
getting at.
no, 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 and I agree with that. And certainly, what I would add to what I said just now would be it is all focused on Jesus. I
Yeah,
think it's all about pointing people to Jesus specifically. Not kind of vague, nebulous ideas of God or something. It is Jesus, and going back to where I started, in some ways, Jesus as a real person. I mean, we're just not long past Remembrance Sunday,
yeah,
and my favourite um, First World War poem, I think it was actually written just after the First World War, but by Edward Shillito, Jesus of the Scars. I don't know if you know the poem that I mean, but the last verse of that is the other gods were strong, but thou wast weak. They rode, but thou didst stumble to a throne. But to our wounds, only God's wounds can speak, and not a God has wounds, but thou alone. And I think
incredible.
that again kind of uniqueness of Jesus,
Mm,
of being God and of being human, is something that speaks very powerfully to people, even if we're not getting into this sort of intellectual ins and
sure.
outs of it. Just that kind of, as I say, that encounter of that unique person of Jesus,
Mm,
speaks really clearly to people, and then being able to say, he is the way, the truth, and the life. And to
right.
come to the Father, you need to go through him. That flows from that, I think.
That's a wonderful place to stop. Richard, thank you so much for today's conversation. It's been great to have you here on Coffee Table Theology, and hopefully we can have you again sometime.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Gareth.
Thank you.